Imagine building a machine that could, theoretically cure disease or solve global logistics.
Right, the ultimate dream technology.
Exactly. But to simply turn it on, you have to burn $85 billion a year.
Which is just a staggering amount of
It's wild. And on top of that, you have to actively ignore the scientists inside your own lab who are screaming that the machine's safety brakes are failing.
Yeah, that's a terrifying scenario.
Well, that exact paradox is playing out inside OpenAI right now. You are trying to stay ahead of the curve, but let's be honest. The daily flood of AI news is just relentless.
Oh, it's impossible to keep up with.
It really is. So today we are cutting through all that noise to look squarely at the person holding the keys to that future.
And we are pulling from an incredibly dense stack of sources for this deep dive. The foundation is a cult Patreon post, which summarizes an exhaustive investigation published in The New Yorker by Ronan Farrow and Andrew Morantz.
And they did, what, over 100 interviews for that piece?
Over 100, yeah.
Yeah.
It's massive. We're also threading in some really crucial financial and strategic reporting from the Wall Street Journal and Axios.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the central tension we are examining today is the severe disconnect between the public utopian promises of OpenAI and the deeply alarming, hyper-leveraged reality described by those who were closest to its CEO.
Right, Sam Altman.
Exactly. The core question the New Yorker investigation circles around isn't about parameter counts or compute. It is fundamentally about trust.
Right. Can this individual be trusted with the architecture of global intelligence?
And the answers provided by his own inner circle are, well, they're far from reassuring.
Yeah, the reporting doesn't merely capture typical corporate friction. It documents a fundamental questioning of his character from the absolute highest echelons of his own network.
Wow. Like who?
Well, the most striking example comes from a senior executive at Microsoft. And Microsoft, of course, is OpenAI's primary financial backer and their most deeply integrated partner.
I mean, they have poured billions into this infrastructure. They've essentially bet the future of their entire product suite on this single relationship.
Exactly. And yet, a senior executive from that very partner describes Altman as someone who has misrepresented, distorted, renegotiated, and broken agreements.
That is, those are incredibly harsh words for a business partner.
Is much heavier.
Yeah.
This same executive stated, there's a small but real possibility that Altman could end up being remembered as a fraudster on the level of Bernie Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried.
Wait, seriously, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because those are two of the most infamous financial criminals of the last century.
Yeah, they are.
Madoff orchestrated a literal, mathematically provable Ponzi scheme, and Bankman-Fried directly siphoned customer deposits at FTX to cover hedge fund losses.
Right. Blatant fraud.
So is this comparison a literal red flag about systemic financial fraud at OpenAI? Or is this just, the hyperbolic frustration of a corporate partner dealing with a classic Silicon Valley fake-it-till-you-make-it founder whose ego is just running hot?
What's fascinating here is that distinction cuts to the very heart of the psychology driving this entire industry.
How so?
Well, in the venture capital ecosystem, projecting an unyielding, almost reality-distorting confidence is practically a prerequisite for raising capital.
Because you're asking for money for something that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. You're asking for billions of dollars. Altman himself is actually remarkably self-aware about this dynamic in the profile. He openly admits to possessing an absolutely delusional level of self-confidence.
Using the word delusional as a badge of honor is such a fascinating psychological tell.
It really is. And it's the engine of early-stage growth. You have to believe you can bend reality to your will to build a company of this scale. But the Microsoft executive isn't throwing around names like Madoff casually. The frustration stems from the fact that the product here isn't like a food delivery network.
Yeah, the stakes are a little higher.
Just a little.
Yeah.
If a logistics startup overpromises its routing efficiency, a package arrives late. If OpenAI overpromises its capabilities, misrepresents its safety metrics, or obfuscates its financial liabilities, the consequences ripple through national security apparatuses, global markets, and the entire information ecosystem.
Which is terrifying.
Right. What the Microsoft executive is reacting to is a pattern of behavior where the reality of the technology and the agreements made around it are constantly shifting beneath their feet to serve Altman's immediate needs.
And when he was pressed in these interviews for a direct guarantee of his trustworthiness, his response was just a brilliant piece of political maneuvering.
Oh, totally.
He didn't offer a guarantee, he merely pointed to the weight of that trust felt throughout the AI industry. It is a total non-answer.
Yeah, it's like, I can't guarantee you should trust me, but look at how heavily this incredible burden weighs on my shoulders.
It effectively reframes a demand for accountability into a testament to his own martyrdom.
Which is incredibly clever, but that lack of transparency is compounding internal anxieties. The sources note a current OpenAI board member warning that the company is financially leveraged in a way that is risky and frightening.
Risky and frightening. And that structural financial fear, it doesn't just stay in the boardroom, it bleeds directly into the lab.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when a CEO prioritizes fundraising and narrative control over transparency, the engineers physically building the models are the first ones forced to bear the brunt of that pressure.
This is exactly where we move from character critiques into the operational reality of the technology itself.
Right.
The primary evidence of this internal fracture is the resignation email from Jan Leik, a former top security and alignment leader at OpenAI.
And what did he say?
He explicitly informed the board that the organization has strayed from its mission, prioritizing product deployment and rapid revenue generation over safety and alignment protocols.
Wow. And for anyone tracking the alignment problem, you know the stakes here. This isn't just about writing a quick content filter so a chatbot doesn't say something inappropriate.
No, not at all.
Alignment is the existential, deeply complex mathematical challenge of ensuring a highly capable system's reward function doesn't inadvertently misalign with human survival or well-being.
And the sheer technical difficulty of alignment is often lost in the public discourse. It involves grueling processes like reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF.
Right, which takes a ton of time.
A massive amount of time. You are essentially trying to train billions of neural pathways to understand human values.
Which are notoriously difficult to quantify mathematically.
Exactly. It requires extensive red teaming. Spending months actively trying to break the model.
Like trying to force it to output dangerous code or catastrophic planning.
Yes, just to see if the safeguards hold. Leik's email is a blaring siren that this methodical, time-intensive scientific process is being sidelined so the sales team has something shiny to announce next quarter.
And that pressure to ship is creating a deeply alarming mindset. That brings us to a quote from a former executive regarding OpenAI's massive push to build new data centers in the Middle East.
This quote is really something.
It is. This is not a quote from a dystopian sci-fi novel, by the way. This is an operational executive talking about physical infrastructure. They said, "We are building portals from which we are literally summoning aliens. It's the most reckless thing we've ever done."
And that phrasing, summoning aliens, it highlights how fundamentally unpredictable these frontier models are, even to the people writing the code.
Right, they are building black boxes.
Exactly. They know input goes in and incredibly sophisticated output comes out. But the internal reasoning process of the model remains totally opaque.
So expanding the physical infrastructure to run larger, even more inscrutable models without first solving the alignment problem is what drives that characterization of extreme recklessness.
Precise.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about building a large language model, like building an experimental next-generation rocket engine.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Pouring in more computing power and more training data is like dumping exponentially more rocket fuel into the chamber. It gets faster, it gets immensely more capable.
But the alignment protocol.
Those are your telemetry systems. That's the array of sensors that tells you if the pressure is spiking, if the engine is about to completely tear itself apart.
Right.
Right now, Altman is backing up tanker trucks of fuel and dumping it in, while the safety engineers are waving their hands, pointing out that the sensors haven't been upgraded to read combustion speeds that high. They're essentially flying blind.
And it's like building a Jurassic Park enclosure without first checking if the electric fences actually work, because you just desperately need to sell tickets.
Yes, perfect way to put it.
That analogy captures the fundamental, unavoidable tension between safety and rapid revenue growth in the current AI space.
Because safety takes time.
Exactly. Ensuring the telemetry system works requires stopping the countdown. It requires pausing the entire operation, testing every valve, and sometimes making the agonizing decision to delay a launch indefinitely because the system is deemed too volatile.
But venture capital does not tolerate pauses.
Never. Generating the immense revenue OpenAI needs to survive requires a constant state of acceleration. They have to dominate the news cycle, integrate into enterprise workflows, and continuously promise a bigger, better model just to keep the valuation climbing.
So you have a board, terrified by the leverage, a major partner comparing the CEO to financial fraudsters, and your lead safety engineers resigning because they feel like they are recklessly summoning an alien force just to hit quarterly targets.
That's a lot.
It is. So the immediate question is, how does a company with that level of internal chaos manage to project such an aura of serene visionary control to the global public?
Well, they do it through highly sophisticated public policy and narrative misdirection.
Misdirection.
Scale. Just as this internal pressure cooker is reaching a critical point, OpenAI releases a comprehensive 13-page policy document titled Industrial Policy for the Age of Intelligence.
And reading through this document, I mean, it reads like the blueprint for a post-scarcity utopia. They are proposing massive structural reforms to the entire global economy.
It's hugely ambitious.
They suggest implementing taxes on automated work. They advocate for a national public wealth fund that would be subsidized by the AI companies themselves.
And they're even pushing for government-backed pilot programs for a 32-hour work week.
Right, operating on the premise that AI will create such a massive surplus of productivity that human labor will be fundamentally redefined. Altman even pitched this to Axios as a modern equivalent of the New Deal.
The framing is just breathtaking in its ambition. By proposing these sweeping societal changes, OpenAI is cementing a very specific narrative. That superintelligence is not just possible, but imminent. And it is a force so powerful that national governments must immediately begin restructuring their tax codes and labor laws to prepare for it.
Wow.
More importantly, it positions Sam Altman at the exact center of this transition, acting not as a tech CEO, but as a benevolent, quasi-governmental steward of humanity's economic future.
But looking at the timeline and the internal realities we just discussed, is this 13-page policy document anything more than an elaborate magician's trick?
How do you mean?
Like, look at the shiny 32-hour work week in my right hand while my left hand burns through $121 billion. Is this the ultimate regulatory camouflage?
That is exactly what critics are saying.
Right, because if OpenAI goes to Washington and says, we are building an energy-draining, monopolistic tech product that burns through billions, they face antitrust hearings and massive regulatory crackdown.
Oh, absolutely.
But if they show up and say, we are the essential architects of a post-scarcity human utopia and here is our new deal, they don't get regulated, they get subsidized.
And prominent voices in the field are making that exact argument. AI researcher Gary Marcus, who has consistently challenged OpenAI's bolder claims, argues that this posturing as a thoughtful societal planner is a highly strategic distraction.
A distraction from what, specifically?
It is designed to draw attention away from the company's escalating financial peril. And when you examine the raw financial data uncovered by the Wall Street Journal, the necessity of that distraction becomes glaringly obvious.
The scale of the capital involved here almost defies comprehension.
The projections indicate that OpenAI expects to spend $121 billion strictly on computing power by the year 2028.
$121 billion. We really need to ground what that number actually represents in the physical world. That is not just paying a cloud provider for server space.
Not at all. That figure represents a massive industrial-scale mobilization of physical resources.
Like buying chips.
Yes, purchasing hundreds of thousands of highly specialized NVIDIA GPUs. It requires securing vast tracts of land for data centers, negotiating with utility companies for literally gigawatts of electricity, and building advanced liquid cooling systems just to keep the silicon from melting.
The physical constraints of the global energy grid are literally becoming the primary bottleneck for their growth.
Exactly. And as a direct result of deploying capital on that massive industrial scale, the Wall Street Journal reports they are projecting $85 billion in losses for the year 2028 alone.
Losing $85 billion in a single 12-month period.
It is a financial profile that breaks the traditional bounds of venture capital.
It's insane.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what makes that staggering burn rate even more concerning is the internal governance surrounding it. The sources reveal that OpenAI's chief financial officer, Sarah Friar, was reportedly excluded from crucial financial discussions by the leadership team.
Let's pause on the mechanics of that, because that is not a minor administrative slight.
No, it's huge.
OpenAI is actively preparing for an initial public offering. They're getting ready to file an S1, open their books, and ask institutional investors and the general public to buy their stock.
Right.
And the CEO is deliberately freezing his own chief financial officer out of the core financial strategy meetings.
In the context of a company preparing to go public, sidelining the CFO is an unprecedented governance failure.
Because she's the one who has to sign off on everything.
Exactly. The CFO bears the ultimate fiduciary responsibility for the accuracy of the company's financial health. If the person legally required to sign off on the audits is being kept in the dark, it strongly implies that the unit economics of the business are deeply flawed.
You mean like the actual cost to generate a single query versus the revenue it brings in?
Yes, it implies those economics are so bad that leadership cannot allow their own chief accountant to rigorously scrutinize the math.
It brings us right back to the pilot ripping up the manual while the plane is in the air. Only in this case, the pilot is locking the flight engineer out of the cockpit, so no one can see that the fuel gauges are tapping on empty.
Which is why the Axios analysis of Altman's incentives is so critical here. Altman is fundamentally cornered by his own burn rate.
How so?
He has a structural, overriding incentive to promote fear, awe, and an almost religious reverence for this technology. He must continuously frame superintelligence as a world-altering, inevitable reality.
Because if you are staring down $85 billion in projected losses, you cannot pitch yourself as a standard software as a service company.
Exactly. You have to convince sovereign wealth funds and massive institutional investors that they are funding the literal next stage of human evolution.
Wow. It requires a masterclass in playing two entirely different characters simultaneously.
It really does.
To the public, to Congress, and to the media, he is the pensive philosopher. He is the man drafting the New Deal for the intelligence age, proposing wealth funds, and humbly bearing the heavy burden of humanity's future.
But behind closed doors, to ensure the data centers get built and the NVIDIA chips keep arriving, he's the most aggressive, cash-burning tech baron of his generation.
Yeah.
He will leverage partnerships to the breaking point, freeze out his financial officers to protect the valuation, and push his engineers to ship models at a pace that causes his own safety teams to resign in protest.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We have mapped out a massive landscape today, from the broken trust in the Microsoft boardroom to the mathematical complexities of alignment, all the way to $121 billion infrastructure builds.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. The central takeaway is the profound dissonance between the narrative being sold and the reality being hidden. We have a company promising a utopian restructuring of global economics, while simultaneously operating with such reckless financial and technical leverage that its own inner circle is sounding alarms about systemic collapse.
And the reason you need to understand this dynamic isn't just to keep up with Silicon Valley gossip. This technology is not quarantined in a research lab.
No, it's everywhere.
It is actively being woven into your enterprise software, your communication tools, and the digital infrastructure you rely on daily. The business model demands ubiquity.
Right.
When you understand the crushing financial pressure driving this company, it acts as a filter. It allows you to critically evaluate the breathless product announcements and the grand policy proposals, recognizing them not necessarily as technological breakthroughs, but as vital mechanisms for raising the next round of capital.
It changes the lens entirely. When a new model drops that supposedly pushes us closer to superintelligence, you now know to look past the demo and ask, how much did the compute cost? And who is actually on the hook for the losses?
And that leads to a scenario we haven't fully reckoned with. We're constantly warned to brace for the arrival of an alien-like superintelligence to prepare our laws and our economies for an entity smarter than ourselves.
Right, the whole New Deal pitch.
But if the entire concept of superintelligence is largely a $121 billion marketing pitch designed to keep a hyper-leveraged company afloat, what happens when the venture capital finally dries up and the promised alien never arrives?
That's a fascinating question.
We might not get a benevolent superintelligence, and we might not get a sci-fi apocalypse. We might just end up profoundly dependent on a deeply flawed, misaligned, and monopolistic software system, simply because it was the only version they could afford to ship before the $85 billion bill came due.
It's a sobering thought to carry with you the next time a tech visionary promises to build you a utopia. Keep questioning the mechanisms behind the magic. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.